NHPR.org.
From New Hampshire Public Radio, I'm Laura Knoy, and this is The Exchange. Democratic presidential candidate John Delaney is with us today. He's a former three-term Maryland congressman with a business background in healthcare and finance. Delaney was the first Democrat to jump into the 2020 primary, announcing back in the summer of 2017. He's been campaigning ever since, positioning himself in the moderate end of the party. For example, he says if elected, he'd only sign bipartisan legislation in his first 100 days as president. Delaney also describes the Democratic primary race overall as a choice between socialism or a more just form of capitalism. Today in The Exchange, we hear more from Congressman Delaney, and let's hear from you, too. Our email, exchange@nhpr.org. Once again, exchange@nhpr.org. Respond on Facebook or Twitter @NHPR Exchange, or give us a call, 1-800-892-6477. And in addition to listening, you can watch our conversation today on Facebook Live. And Congressman Delaney, it's nice to meet you. Welcome to The Exchange. Welcome to New Hampshire.
It's so great to be here.
So how do you define yourself as a Democrat? I use the term moderate, but maybe there's another term you like to use.
Well, in many ways, I'm a different kind of Democrat because I'm definitely defined by some as more moderate and more centrist. I tend to think of myself as someone who's a problem solver. You know, I've spent my whole career, whether it's been in Congress or in the private sector, bringing people together and actually finding common ground and getting things done. And I think that's exactly what we need today, because there's so many things we should have already dealt with in our country and our society. We need someone who actually wants to lead us around a conversation about some of the things we agree with each other on and actually make progress on those issues to help the American people, but also to help us rethink our future, because the future we're leaving our kids right now is not the one we want to leave them.
Is this a time for a moderate Democrat? It seems that in the Democratic Party anyway, it's becoming more, you can call it progressive, you can call it liberal, you can call it left, whatever you want to call it. So is this your time?
I think so, because I think what the Democratic primary voters are ultimately going to want to put forth is someone who they think can be the best leader for our country. And I think what our country needs now more than anything, is someone to try to bring us together. I think the central issue facing this country is how terribly divided we are. And I think our current president just thrives in those divisions. He pits American against American. He's basically projecting an image to the American people that your enemy is your fellow American. And we need a leader to bring us together, to start getting some real things done that matter to the American people, and working to rebuild the future.
Got a couple emails, actually,
Great.
On your moderate politics.
Sure.
Here's one from Tom who says, why did you not run as an independent using the power of social media, online forums, news coverage regarding what would be a distinctly different campaign, Tom says. He says your target market, thoughtful moderates like me, and there are a lot of us, Tom says, might not be aligned with either party, as both parties give us more and more reasons to be disaffected. Tom, thank you for the email. And what about that, Congressman Delaney? Why not run as an independent?
Well, listen, I've been a Democrat my whole life. I grew up in a union family. My dad was a union electrician. I believe the things that I'm fighting for are completely consistent with what Democrats around this country stand for. I just believe, Tom, that the Democratic Party should not give up on the center. I mean, I believe the election in 2020 is going to be fought in the center. I'm as convinced as that as I am at anything. I think the president's going to turn out his voters. He's going to turn out our voters. And the winner in 2020 is going to be the party and the candidate that can capture the center. So I think it's incredibly important for the Democratic Party to be a Big Tent party, to be a party that's welcoming of progressives who want change, moderates like me and like you, Tom, who want solutions, independents who just want their elected officials to put their country ahead of their political party, and all these disaffected Republicans who are leaving the Republican Party because they have a sense that this president doesn't really have the kind of moral compass that they think that party's always stood for. So I think there's an enormous opportunity for the Democratic Party to be the party the American people are looking for, which is a real governing leadership party. But I also think that's the candidate in the party that wins.
You've said that this primary on the Democratic side is a choice between, quote, socialism and, quote, a more just form of capitalism. What do you mean by that, Congressman Delaney?
So that quote probably came after I said something like it's a bit of a false choice, this debate we're having around capitalism and socialism. Because in truth, the United States of America is a free market economy. And the free market is the greatest job creation and innovation machine ever created. But we've also always had really strong social programs. And in many ways, the genius of America is that we allowed capitalism to work its magic, right, which is to create jobs and innovate. But we moderated it or channeled it towards the common good with great societal infrastructure, workers' rights, appropriate tax policy, smart regulation. And really what's happened in the last several decades is we stopped doing that second half. In other words, the social compact, right, that exists for the benefit of all of our citizens and is really needed to allow capitalism to work in a way that serves a broad number of people, we've let that erode, and we haven't really kind of reimagined it for the time we're in now. So to some extent, it's a bit of a false choice. I'm a capitalist. I believe in capitalism, but I also believe in really strong social programs. So I think as a party, we should do what we've always done in this country, which is to take affirmative steps to make capitalism more just and inclusive.
So in that quote, and again, that's from you,
yes.
You're not calling your fellow Democrats socialists. That's not what you're doing there?
I mean, some of them call themselves socialists, and some of them are embracing government-only solutions, right, which I don't think is the right answer. Right? I think the best public policy prescriptions in this country are ones where the private sector, the government sector, and the nonprofit sector work well together. Right? Those are common sense approaches. So listen, my campaign's not about kind of talking about my opponents. I know some of them put forth solutions that I call government-only solutions, and I know those don't work. Not that I don't believe the government should have a more affirmative role in certain things. I do. But I think top-down government-only solutions ultimately don't work as well as solutions that have a market orientation to them.
So give us a couple examples,
Sure.
please, of these government-only solutions that some other Democrats are
Sure.
offering that you think would not be effective.
So healthcare is a good example, right? So I think everyone should have healthcare as a right. I believe in universal healthcare, right? I think it's a basic human right, and I think it's smart economic policy. But I don't believe in a system where the government is the only payer in healthcare. And one of the reasons I don't agree with that system is if you look at the government programs right now, Medicaid and Medicare, they don't pay enough. So if you go to a community hospital, if you go to Elliott Hospital here in New Hampshire and ask them how they would do if all of their commercial insurance payments were paid at the Medicare or Medicaid rates, and they would say, we would close. And the reason for that is Medicaid only pays 80% of costs, Medicare pays 95% of cost, and commercial insurance pays 115 to 120% of cost. So if the government is the only payer, there's no evidence that they ever pay enough. So I don't see why as a country we would advocate for a government-only payment system in healthcare, because that would inevitably lead to lower quality and more limited access. So there's a perfect example. I believe in universal healthcare, and I got a whole proposal to do that, and we probably don't have enough time to go through that now. But it involves a backbone government plan, but it allows the American people to have options to choose private insurance or to get supplemental plans.
Well, let's talk
Climate
about
change
that.
is another example. I believe in a carbon tax, right? I introduced the only bipartisan carbon tax bill in the Congress. That I believe I can get done in my first year as president with all the Democrats and with the Republicans who live in coastal states. And that would be a market-based solution to start making a real difference against climate change.
So healthcare, a carbon tax, those are areas where you feel like your combination of government
Yes.
and market-oriented solutions would work. And so you've whetted our appetites, Congressman Delaney. So let's jump into some of those
Sure.
issues. And let's tackle healthcare first. You have called, as you just said, for universal healthcare. You've called it a fundamental right. What's the difference then between this and Medicare for all? And who pays for this plan, by the way?
So Medicare for all basically says the government provides all the health care. My plan is different. I leave Medicare alone. I create a new plan that everyone gets as a right from when they're born till they're 65.
So the public option, so to speak, that we saw during the Obamacare debate?
This is actually a basic health care package that everyone gets. They don't have to choose it. They get it. And you roll Medicaid into that. So you'd have this new program from when you're born to when you're 65, and then you'd have Medicare for over 65. But if you don't want the government plan, you can opt out, get a small tax credit, and buy your own commercial insurance. Or you can take your government health care insurance and buy supplemental plans, just like what happens with Medicare. Most Medicare recipients have their basic government plan, and then they buy supplemental. So what I'm basically proposing is a government backbone market where everyone gets health care as a right. So if they're low income, between jobs, want to go start a business, they age off their parents' plan, whatever the case may be, they have health care. Everybody. But they also have no matter what their income level. But they also have the option of opting out, getting a tax credit, buying their own commercial insurance, or buying supplementals to enhance their government plan. And I pay for that whole system, fully paid for in my proposal, by eliminating the corporate deductibility of health care, which is about a $4 trillion tax exemption.
Why would people need to buy supplemental insurance if the public plan were good?
Same reason they buy it with Medicare. Because as a country, we like options. We like choices. We like bells and whistles. We like hanging Christmas ornaments on the tree. And so I just think saying one size fits all, we're going to create a government plan and get rid of all the other plans out there and make you take this government plan, A, is not practical, B, it's not the American people want, because they want choices. So just like Medicare, where people get a basic plan and then they buy options, that's the common sense way to create universal health care in this country.
Is getting rid of that tax subsidy for employer-sponsored insurance that you mentioned, $3.7 trillion with a T? Is that what you said?
Yes, $4 trillion.
Is that enough to pay for a lot of health care for a lot of people?
My plan is fully paid for.
Just by getting rid of that
also
tax deduction?
Yeah, it's $4 trillion. It's not a small tax deduction. $4 trillion over 10 years. And then the Affordable Care Act has $1 trillion of subsidies, and you wouldn't need that any longer under my plan, right? So that's $5 trillion of what are called pay-fors, and my plan costs about $5 trillion.
How does the private health insurance market, the private health provider industry, the doctors and hospitals and so forth, how do they feel about this approach?
They like it. I think that the doctors and the hospitals like it because they know under the single payer government-only plan that it'll hurt them very much, right? And I've talked to all the providers about it. I say, how do you feel about getting rid of commercial insurance and having all the bills paid by the government? They're like, well, to us, that's a big cut in our payments. And a lot of us wouldn't be able to stay in business, right? Upwards of 1,000 community hospitals would close in this country if the government were the only payer and it paid at Medicare rates. So they like my plan better because they know it maintains commercial insurance, which is important to them to sustain their operations. So, that's one of the main tests. And I also think, look, healthcare is a lot like Congress. If you go to your average American and say, how do you feel about Congress? They're like, well, I hate Congress. But how do you feel about your member of Congress? They're like, well, I kind of like my member of Congress. Same thing with healthcare. If you go to most Americans and say, how do you feel about the U.S. healthcare system? Well, they say, well, it's a crazy system. But how do you feel about your health insurance? They're like, well, I kind of like my plan.
Well, that depends on who you talk to.
70% of the American people like their healthcare plan.
Let's move on from healthcare because we have a lot more to talk about. But I invite listeners to join us with your questions about healthcare or any other issue that you want to ask Democratic presidential candidate Congressman John Delaney about. Our phone number, 1-800-892-6477. Email us, exchange@nhpr.org. Once again, exchange@nhpr.org. Respond on Facebook or Twitter @NHPR Exchange. Let's talk about immigration, Congressman Delaney. And this week, the head of U.S. Customs and Border Protection said his agency has reached a, quote, breaking point at the southern border. I'm sure you heard about this. He said there are record numbers of migrants arriving seeking asylum. He says the agency is reluctantly releasing migrants into the U.S. because it just doesn't have the capacity to process so many people. A bunch of questions for you, please. First of all, why do you think this is happening?
I think it's happening because of what's going on in Central America. So I was at the border about 2 months ago. My wife and I went down there, and we took 14 law students with us from Georgetown. She just stepped down as the chair of the Georgetown Law School Board. And we took 2 professors. We sponsored the trip. They were there for a week, helping asylum seekers make their case to U.S. authorities. So we basically went into a legal aid center in Dilley, Texas, which is located next to the largest detention facility in the United States of America, where there were 1,700 women and children in this detention facility when we were there. And we were there for a week helping these asylum seekers make their case. So I heard firsthand from these moms sitting there with their children why they were seeking asylum in our country.
What did they say?
And they said, because the story was always generally the same, which is someone in their family was either killed or threatened to be killed by the gangs, and the gangs were completely in bed with the law enforcement. So they had no recourse. So if you heard these stories, every single one of your listeners, if they were in that situation, I believe would leave one of those countries as well.
So what would be a President Delaney approach toward this, given, yes, there are heartbreaking stories from these families coming. On the other hand, it seems, according to the head of U.S. Customs and Border Protection anyway, that we've just reached our overcapacity to manage this.
So what I certainly wouldn't do is be threatening to cut foreign aid to these countries, which is what the president's doing. That'll make the situation worse. So what President Delaney would do is lead a regional effort to help stabilize, which means really build civil institutions in these countries. Because unless we stabilize and create some framework for the rule of law to exist in these countries, we will not be able to stem the tide of people fleeing these countries and coming to our country seeking asylum.
Can we, the U.S., really do that, create a stable environment, especially given that you know this as a former congressman, you send foreign aid and sometimes it's used effectively and sometimes it isn't. You just said that the law enforcement is in bed with the gang members.
Yeah, so I think the way you have to do it, it's very hard to do.
And it takes a long time. It's not going to stop this crisis at the border.
Absolutely, right? But that doesn't mean we shouldn't try to do it. So the way you have to do it is, thinking about what your goals are. Right, is your goals are to help these countries build some form of civil society. And the best way for the United States to do that is with foreign aid, but not working directly, working indirectly through non-governmental organizations, which have been proven to be much more successful in many of these countries. Nonprofits that actually help. Now, that's not the only thing we got to do, obviously.
Yeah, let's talk
I'm just
about
saying that will obviously, if we want to actually get at the core issue as why people are leaving and coming to the United States, you have to recognize that what they're doing is logical. It's what any of us would do.
They're fleeing violence.
For their families, right? They don't want to sit there and watch one child after another get killed. Anyone would leave that situation. So obviously we need comprehensive immigration reform like we almost had in 2013. That was a huge missed opportunity.
You were in Congress at that point.
I was in Congress. The greatest missed opportunity I think I've ever seen right in front of my eyes, not taken advantage of in my life. It passed the Senate on a bipartisan basis. It would have passed the House of Representatives if it ever got a vote, and President Obama would have signed it into law. If that law had been passed, we would have spent tens of billions of dollars more on border security already, right? Because that was in the bill, smart border security. We would have created a pathway to legal kind of status for the 11 million undocumented folks in our country. And we would have reformed our broken visa systems. And we would have been just in a much better position around immigration.
Okay, there's a lot more to talk about
Absolutely.
there in immigration. I'll ask you a couple more questions,
Sure.
Congressman Delaney, including that path to citizenship for those here illegally. And we'll talk about some other topics, including climate change and the Green New Deal. We'll also talk about the economy, foreign policy, and we'll take more of your questions. Thanks for that email, Tom. You can email us as well, exchange@nhpr.org. Once again, exchange@nhpr.org. Or you can give us a call, 1-800-892-6477. More with Congressman John Delaney in just a moment. This is The Exchange on NHPR.
This is NHPR. Good morning. Join NHPR tomorrow evening at 8 o'clock for a Women's History music special. We'll be celebrating women and the contributions of women through the lens of roots, blues, soul, and Americana music. That's tomorrow night at 8 and again on Sunday at 6 p.m. right here on NHPR and online at nhpr.org. Support for NHPR comes from you, our listeners, and from Grapponi Automotive Group, providing the ability to get a new or used car online without stepping foot into the dealership. Details at grapponi.com. Clouding up for today, high temperatures upper 40s to lower 50s. It'll be mostly cloudy, a chance of rain showers tonight. Low temperatures mid to upper 30s. Then mostly cloudy with a chance of showers tomorrow, highs in the 50s. Saturday, mostly cloudy, showers likely in the morning, high temperatures in the 50s. This is NHPR.
This is The Exchange. I'm Laura Knoy. Today, Democratic presidential candidate John Delaney is with us. He's a former three-term Maryland congressman with a business background. Delaney was the first Democrat to jump into the 2020 primary he announced way back in the summer of 2017. Send us an email, exchange@nhpr.org. Respond on Facebook or Twitter @NHPR Exchange, or give us a call, 1-800-892-6477. And in addition to listening to our program today, you can watch on Facebook Live. Congressman Delaney, just before the break, we were talking about immigration, and I wanted to ask you one more question on that. You said under the comprehensive immigration reform proposal in Congress, while you were still there, you said tragedy that it was not signed, would be in a lot better space if it had been. You said part of that plan was to secure the border, provide a path to citizenship for those here illegally. What does that really mean, path to citizenship?
Well, under that bill, what it means that they would have to basically get to the back of the line. In other words, they'd have to register for citizenship. It would take them 13 years.
Yikes.
To
it's a
get
long time.
Citizenship. Yeah, but it's probably about right? They shouldn't get ahead of people who have actually been processing themselves legally. They have to basically be crime-free for the 13 years, or then they were subject to being deported if they commit a crime. And they have to learn English. Right, so it was a rigorous process, which I understand. Look, my grandparents came here as immigrants. One of my grandparents came here in 1923 with his 7 brothers and sisters, and he was almost deported because he only had one arm, and we didn't accept people with disabilities at the time. And
from what country? Just curious.
England. I'm 3/4 Irish, 1/4 English. He came with his 7 brothers and sisters. They were all let in. He was detained, scheduled for deportation, sent to Staten Island while he was waiting to be deported. His family got him an appeal, and the appeal was held in front of a judge. And it just so happened that the judge also only had one arm. And that's the only reason he let the little boy into the country with one arm.
What a story.
Yeah. And the judge told him to go make something of his life, which he did. And so, I get the struggle that so many immigrants have lived to come to this country through the legal immigration system. So I think it's appropriate that those folks who are here and who are undocumented actually have a rigorous process, but it totally makes sense for us as a country to put them on a path to legal status.
So where does that 13-year wait take place? Because that's a key point.
Well, they're granted temporary status.
I see.
While they wait 13 years.
So,
and again, that was in that bill. There's other ways of doing it, but that was in the bill. And that bill would be in my first 100-day agenda.
As you know, conservative analysts say allowing the undocumented or illegal immigrants to stay undermines the credibility of our immigration system overall because you're basically sanctioning illegal behavior. What do you think about that point, Congressman Delaney?
So that's an example of someone who puts ideology ahead of smart, common sense policy that's in the self-interest of the United States of America. And what I mean by that is, of course, we should secure our borders. Of course, we should invest in kind of a border security regime so that everyone comes into this country legally. But that doesn't also mean, because we didn't do that for a long time, and there are now 11 or 12 million undocumented residents in this country, that the right thing to do is to deport them. That's the terrible idea, right? It's terrible for the country economically, putting aside those human beings, right? It's terrible for the country. What some of these ideologues don't understand is the worst thing for a country is to have a shrinking population. You look at Russia, you look at Japan, you look at some of these countries in the world that don't welcome immigrants and are shrinking. It is a disastrous economic model. One of the great things about our country is that we still are growing.
Some people with this situation at the border, again, the facilities down there really straining at capacity and well beyond. And some folks are saying down there that part of the reason so many people are coming is because of this idea that they can get quote unquote amnesty as soon as they come in.
I'm sure that is the case with some people, right? I mean, again, like when we're talking about really big numbers, of course there's always going to be some examples of that. But in general, we shouldn't get allow ourselves to go down this path of these kind of ridiculous false choices. We should have a strong border and strong, smart, effective border security. But then we should do what's also in our self-interest, which is to allow the undocumented residents in this country who are integral to our economy at this point and to our communities, right? Many of these people are the fabric of many of our communities. We should create, and they're law-abiding, they're paying taxes, we should create a pathway for them to get legal status in our country.
Congressman Delaney, a couple emails coming in, people asking questions about your health care
Sure,
plan, which we
absolutely.
talked about earlier, this base plan that everyone would get, and
Yes.
then the opportunity to buy supplementals, which you described. BJ says, I don't buy my Medicare supplemental insurance because I, quote, want choices. I buy it because Medicare alone doesn't cover everything. BJ says, I want government-sponsored universal health care that covers everything like other first world countries have. BJ says, I lived in Canada for 10 years, had 3 babies there, one of whom needed surgery and never saw a bill. That's what we want. Good government health care brings down soaring drug and hospital costs and helps the people. So that's BJ. And then David says, it sounds to me that the quality of health care will be based on income. If you can afford health care, you're okay. But if not, your care will be limited. What happens to those who come down with a life-altering health problem and have limited income? Are they destined to die due to financial restrictions? This gets to the idea of, under your plan, one could perceive it as a 2-tier system. Everybody gets the base, but those who can afford buy these nice, cushy supplementals.
My view is the base plan will be a very good plan. It'll have kind of a benefit package that is similar, if not identical, to the minimum standards in the Affordable Care Act. And that's a good, solid base package of health care where all your major medical needs are taken care of. Does that mean that some people won't buy supplementals to give them more options about which providers they can go to, et cetera? Yes, that's what I envision in the plan. And the reason I'm laying out this plan the way I am is because I care so much about this issue. People who are promising a government-only plan where every optionality is potentially covered, they have no chance of turning that into reality.
So partly this is a political calculation.
No, it's not political. It's just smart policy, right? We have ample evidence, 50 years of evidence to suggest that the government never pays enough. So there's no reason to ever believe that if we had a government-only payer, that it would pay enough. And what people don't realize is, if you look at Medicaid here in New Hampshire, one of the reasons Medicaid recipients in New Hampshire have such limited options is because New Hampshire Medicaid doesn't pay enough. Why? Because the taxpayers of the state of New Hampshire don't want to pay more taxes to fund higher health care. And that is a true dynamic around this country. Medicare doesn't pay fully cost. I mean, on average, in a community hospital in this country, they get paid half from Medicare what they get from private insurance for the exact same procedure.
Sure, as you described earlier,
Right.
the reimbursement rates are so low.
So you have to make sure you maintain some private funding in the healthcare system.
2 more quick emails on
Sure.
healthcare, and then I do want to talk to you about climate, trade, the economy. Again, we invite your questions and comments, 1-800-892-6477. Email exchange@nhpr.org. Karen asks, would employers no longer provide healthcare benefits under this proposed plan?
They would, but they would provide it differently. So if you showed up to work, Karen, I think the question was from Karen, if you showed up at your employer, you would have your basic government plan. And I suspect what your employer would do is go negotiate a group supplemental plan using their buying power so that you then would have an option through your employer to purchase a supplemental plan at an attractive price. And the way the supplemental providers would work is very similar to the way they work with Medicare. They would basically merge the plans together and it would feel like you have one plan, right? Because it would be administered by the supplemental provider. But whenever you have medical care, the bills would be paid through a combination of using your government insurance and your supplemental plan.
And by the way, you have a background in healthcare.
My
That was
first
one of the
first company, which I started from scratch and took public, and at the time I was the youngest CEO in the New York Stock Exchange, focused on lending money to small to mid-sized healthcare companies, mostly rural hospitals, long-term care providers, home healthcare companies. So in my business career, I lent money to over 1,000 small to mid-sized healthcare companies. So I really understand how this business works from an economic perspective, particularly in rural America.
Thank you for that email as well, Karen. Again, our email address is exchange@nhpr.org. Use Facebook or Twitter. It's NHPR Exchange, or you can call in 1-800-892-6477. Let's talk about climate change, Congressman Delaney, and the Green New Deal specifically. Some have described this as a gift to Republicans, allowing them to paint Democrats as too far left, out of touch, hurting the economy. One Republican congressman said the Green New Deal would mean no more ice cream because he said that it would ban dairy products. So all this sort of stuff is being said about the Green New Deal. What do you think about this Green New Deal as a vehicle for Democrats to present climate change as a problem?
So I think, first of all, I think what the Republicans are saying are nonsense. They deny climate change exists. So they have no credibility with me on this issue. Listen, I think it's created a lot of excitement around doing something big on climate, and I think that's positive. I really do. I think my plan is a much better plan for addressing climate, materially better, and I'll tell you why. My plan has three components to it. First, a carbon tax. I introduced the only bipartisan carbon tax bill in the Congress. I believe in my first year as president, I can get it passed with all the Democrats and Republicans who live in coastal states. And under my proposal, we put a price on carbon. All the money that gets collected, we give back to the American people in a dividend. It's been modeled to cut carbon emissions by 90%.
So you're going to have to walk us through that because
Sure.
people hear carbon tax and they think, whoa, that's going to hurt the economy.
Nope.
It's going to cost me more to fill up
Nope.
my car. It's going to cost my power plant more to create,
This
electricity
is how it
from
works.
natural gas.
We put a price on carbon, and it does raise energy prices for fossil fuel-related energies. And then we collect all the money in a lockbox, and then we write a check back to the American people in a dividend. So it goes out one pocket and in the other, but it encourages people to change behavior.
Couldn't they just take that extra money that you just sent them and use it to buy more gasoline?
But the price of gasoline would be higher, so they'd actually have an incentive to buy cars that are more fuel efficient. So what their incentive would be is to take the check that they have, use it for something else, right, and do something to lower their energy costs.
That's the hope. Maybe they just use it to spend money on that more expensive gas. It just becomes a circle. You see what I'm saying?
But that's not really how it works. I mean, there's evidence as how these things work because you create financial incentives, and human beings respond to financial incentives. So that's the first thing, and a carbon tax has been proven to work. When they don't work is what happened with what France did.
So where were they proven to work, first of all? Give us an example.
Australia had them. Many Northern European countries have had them.
Still have?
Yeah, they have. Nova Scotia has one that's actually very successful. I mean, economists have been modeled these. When they don't work is what France did. So what France did is they put a carbon tax in place. And they took all the money and they used it to cut taxes for wealthy French people.
That's the reason for that protest movement just recently.
That's obviously
Yellow
a
vests.
terrible idea, right? The other way they don't work is like Governor Inslee tried to get one passed in Washington State, where he proposed a carbon tax, but that the government would keep all the money invested in green energy projects. No one trusts the government to do that. So they only work as if you put a price on carbon and you give money back to the American people. But that's the first thing I do. That doesn't solve climate change, but it slows it down. The second thing I would do is increase the investment in basic energy research by fivefold, a real moonshot around research. We spend $6 billion a year on research. We should spend 30. We fundamentally need new storage and transmission technologies if we want to solve this problem. And I believe the American way of innovating our way out of the problem is what we ultimately have to do with climate. And the third thing I would do is create a market for something called negative emissions technologies. These are machines that actually exist that suck carbon out of the air, filter it, and pump it back in the earth. The problem is these machines are incredibly expensive and not of scale. What I've proposed is to take the $5 billion that we currently give fossil fuel companies in tax breaks and use that money each year to create a market to basically buy carbon and encourage all this innovation to basically get these machines to scale so that they can actually be effective. And I think if we do that, we'll actually save the world.
So, speaking purely politically, if you were the nominee, I can hear the ads from the other side right now Congressman John Delaney is going to raise your cost of filling your gas tank. Congressman Delaney is going to raise the cost of you heating your house. I can see the ad with the little old lady sitting at home shivering because, you raised her
and what we would do,
fuel costs.
What we would do is show them that, listen,
is that a winning strategy? That's what I'm asking.
Yes, because I think what we'll show them is that, your price at the pump is going to go up, but you'll get a check every year from this government lockbox, if you will, equal to more than your price of fuel went up. And by the way, you can take your check in cash, or we'll put it into a retirement account, health savings account, or educational savings account on your behalf, which is a tax-free savings account.
Do you think people trust the government enough to say, that sounds like a good idea?
Yes.
That this check will actually arrive and it will actually go to all these
Well, the government
purposes.
can guarantee it. I mean, people trust that their Social Security check's going to come. So I think they'll trust that this check is going to come because you basically structure it in a way so the check is effectively guaranteed because you can model how much the carbon tax is going to raise.
Let's move back.
We have to do something.
Let's move back to our listeners,
Sure.
Congressman Delaney. We could talk about Green New Deal,
Sure.
climate for another half hour for sure. I want to invite again our listeners to join us. The number 1-800-892-6477. The email exchange@nhpr.org. And Ray's calling in from Londonderry. Hi, Ray. You're on the air. Welcome.
Good morning.
Morning.
I'd like to ask the congressman, not that my background is important, but I've been a lifelong Republican. But in 2016, I was supporting initially Senator Jim Webb, formerly senator from Virginia, and was a member of Veterans for Webb. But, of course, he dropped out early and saying that the Democratic Party had just become too far left for him to be able to compete. And as I listen to Congressman Delaney, I find his ideas, many of them to be very good, something that I could support. But my question is, are you left enough in this primary season where everybody's trying to be more progressive than the next one to have a chance at winning?
Ray, thank you so much for the question. And I remember in past primaries, the same question was posed to some Republican contenders. Are you conservative enough to win a Republican primary? It's a great question, Ray. Thank you.
It's a really great question, Ray. And I think the answer is yes. And the reason I say that is as follows. I think as the primary becomes closer, because we're still pretty far, we're 11 months from the New Hampshire primary, first in the nation. I think the most important thing for Democrats will be beating Donald Trump. By any measure, that is going to be the number one criteria among Democrats. And I think now that the Mueller report's over, now that we're in a country where the economy is doing reasonably well, I think it's pretty obvious that the way you beat Donald Trump is with a more moderate centrist candidate. And I think that'll be obvious to everyone in the Democratic Party when we get closer to the Iowa caucus and the New Hampshire primary, because I think people will appreciate that the president is going to turn out his voters, and he's going to do a good job turning out Democratic voters. We don't need a candidate to turn out voters. We're going to turn out against Donald Trump. So this election is going to be fought in the center.
Well, we'll talk about that after a short break. Thank you for the call, Ray. And thank you, Congressman, for the perfect segue to talk about what I want to talk about next, which is the Mueller report, also the economy. We have a couple questions from listeners, too, about foreign policy, so we'll tackle that in just a moment. Stay right here. This is The Exchange on NHPR.
Being a blue governor in a red state has its challenges. Democrat Laura Kelly of Kansas has been facing those challenges since winning last year's gubernatorial race. Can she make politics work locally when so much seems broken nationally?
My gut says that we've got to find a different way because people's votes are just not being counted.
That's next time on 1A.
That's this morning at 10 here on Support for NHPR comes from you, our listeners, and from the University of New Hampshire School of Law, ranked a top 100 law school by U.S. News and World Report, accepting applications for the fall. Learn more at law.unh.edu. Clouding up today, high temperatures upper 40s to lower 50s. It'll be mostly cloudy tonight, chance of rain showers in the overnight. Low temperatures tonight, mid to upper 30s. This is NHPR.
This is The Exchange. I'm Laura Knoy. Today, Democratic presidential candidate John Delaney is here. He's a former Maryland congressman who's been running for president for almost 2 years. We're also taking your questions and comments, so let's hear from you. Email exchange@nhpr.org. Use Facebook or Twitter at NHPR Exchange, or give us a call, 1-800-892-6477. And Congressman, just before the break, you mentioned the Mueller investigation. You seemed to indicate that it was time to move on, but I would like to ask you what your reaction was last week when the special counsel released his report and the Attorney General gave us his summary.
Well, my first reaction was that we need to see the report, because I think, I have no reason not to trust the Attorney General, but I've always believed in trust and verify, and I think every American should see this report. We're never going to be able to move on from this issue as a country unless there's full transparency, and I think the obstruction kind of claim, if you will, or case, if you will, was obviously a very close call for Mr. Mueller, and the Attorney General used discretion in his decision with respect to obstruction. And I think the American people deserve to see the facts themselves so that they can reach their own conclusion.
What facts do you feel are missing that you would like to see?
Well, I just think this has been such a controversial issue that it just demands complete transparency. But your question was, how did I feel? Look, at some level, I was happy not only that the report came out, but I was actually happy that the President of the United States did not actively collude with a foreign power. I think every American should be happy about that. So as it relates to the collusion kind of case, if you will, I was pleased that the President did not collude with a foreign power. Do I think the President's behavior was presidential? Absolutely not. Do I think he did some unpatriotic things? Absolutely. Do I think the obstruction claim was obviously a close call? Yes. You can tell by the way the Attorney General wrote his letter. So I just think we need this report to be out. The American people need to see it, draw their own conclusions, and then move on.
Where do you think Democrats in Congress and on the presidential trail should go from here in terms of what they do, what they say, how they talk about this? What would be your advice? My
advice is to focus on issues that matter to the American people. Focus on pharmaceutical prices. Like I just rolled out a plan to dramatically lower pharmaceutical costs. That's what we should talk about. Focus on how we can deal with climate in a way that makes sense, right? You just asked me, is my climate proposal, is it politically viable? Well, my climate proposal has bipartisan support in the Congress. Yes, Republicans signed on my carbon tax bill, right? So that's the kind of stuff we should be talking about. How to improve healthcare, how to build infrastructure, how to improve public education.
So you would advise Democrats to just move on from this thing.
Let's focus on the issues that the American people worry about at their kitchen table.
Again, our number, 1-800-892-6477. Email exchange@nhpr.org. Here's an email that came in earlier from Dylan, who wants to know about foreign policy. He says, just debrief us on your foreign policy. And Dylan, thank you so much. We had another candidate, Tulsi Gabbard, on last week, and she said the number one reason she was running was to keep the U.S. out of what she called wasteful regime change wars. She felt very strongly about that. And with her military background, she talked about how that informed her feelings. What do you think, Congressman Delaney? What's your view of how involved the U.S. should be in what Tulsi Gabbard called wasteful regime change wars?
Well, I suspect every single Democrat running for the presidency believes we should not be engaged in regime change wars, right?
Although that often doesn't start out that way.
Yeah, they don't start out that way, right? They never do. Right. I mean, although Iraq kind of did. Right. So obviously, regime change is not part of my foreign policy perspective. My foreign policy perspective is basically built on the post-World War II model of U.S. engagement internationally, which is to work through an incredibly unique portfolio of allies, unmatched by any country in the world. No one has allies like we do. To work through our allies diplomatically, economically, to actually build a world that's more peaceful and more secure. So my foreign policy is based on engagement, heavy engagement diplomatically and economically. One of the reasons I was supportive of, for example, the Trans-Pacific Partnership is that I believe it's incredibly important for us to have stability in the Asia-Pacific region, for the United States to be engaged economically in Asia, right, which is what the Trans-Pacific Partnership did. So I generally prescribe to that theory that we should be actively working. When you're meeting with foreign dignitaries, you should always have your diplomatic and economic team at the table, because the best way to create a world that's peaceful and secure and not be engaged in wars all the time is to be engaged in other ways. And I think the United States has to get back to that. I think the current president doesn't value our allies, right? He engages in one-off transactional kind of relationships with different countries, and he doesn't fundamentally understand that what the United States has done across the last 70 years, while it hasn't been perfect, and Iraq and Vietnam are good examples of big mistakes we've made, it has in general made the American people safer and more prosperous.
Well, when you talk about economic engagement and how that leads to positive political relations, that's the whole basis for the European Union. You've made much, though, of your family's union background. You talk about how your father, was a strong, proud union man, but you have been a supporter of trade deals, as you just said, Congressman Delaney. In the last presidential election, both Donald Trump and Bernie Sanders seemed to benefit from an anti-trade stance. Even Hillary Clinton, who had a record as a pro-trade person, dialed back her support for trade deals and on free trade, and that was a struggle for her. What's your outlook then on this issue in terms of the concerns about trade deals as expressed pretty strongly in the last election?
So my philosophy is to, if I could summarize it in a phrase, is to think globally but invest locally. So the problem wasn't that we entered into these trade deals. Sure, they could be better. They always could be better. The problem is that we forgot to invest in the communities that we knew would be left behind, right? So if you go to like some of these towns, Newton, Iowa is an example, where the Whirlpool plant left. Every single citizen in that town can tell you the day the plant closed. Every single citizen. And we didn't do anything about it. So the decision to engage in the Trans-Pacific Partnership, for example, is not the wrong decision. It's absolutely the right decision. We have to be engaged in the world. But what was a terrible decision, for example, was to cut our investment in infrastructure as a percentage of our economy in half across the last 50 years, which is what we did.
So trade adjustment assistance, that's
well,
the federal
yeah, but that's not enough.
For years.
That's just a rounding error.
That's been around for a while.
Yeah, but it doesn't work. It has to be something much more meaningful. I urged the Obama administration to pair their efforts to do the Trans-Pacific Partnership with $1 trillion national infrastructure program. That's the kind of thing that works, right? Pair it with changes to the tax code to encourage people to invest in communities that are left behind. Pair it with changes to how we contract with government contractors to basically require 25% of government contractors to have half of their employees in places that are negatively impacted by global trade. Those are real solutions, right, to transition the United States into a global economy so that huge parts of our country are not left behind.
Another question about workers left behind. You've called for a national strategy on artificial intelligence. But as I'm sure you know, Congressman, artificial intelligence is also blamed for job loss, and people fear that it may lead to more job loss, automation, robotics. There's some predictions that many blue-collar and even some white-collar jobs might be affected. There's a McDonald's halfway between Concord and where my mother lives that is partly automated now. You just don't even have to talk to somebody. You just poke some buttons and stick your credit card in. So what's your plan to avoid that kind of job loss and potential economic disruption?
It's funny. I think I was at that McDonald's a couple months ago. And I just walked in, and one of my colleagues went to the restroom before we ordered, and a gentleman walked in who was a construction worker. I could just tell by what he was wearing, and he saw that kiosk, and he looked at his buddy, and he goes, "No way, I'm touching that thing. That thing's taking away a job."
Okay, but most people, or a lot of people, aren't going to feel that way. There's a CVS that I go to when I have business in D.C., and there's 2 people who work there. The rest of it's all automated.
So look at automation is incredibly positive. right? It improves our lives fundamentally. But people are right to be worried. I mean, some people think by 2030, 50 million jobs will be displaced or fundamentally changed because of automation and artificial intelligence.
Wow, that's a big number. So what's your plan?
My plan is to prepare our country for it, right? We have to really prepare our country with changes in education, changes in workforce training, changes with tax policy to encourage investments. You know, the thing about innovation, it has always created more jobs than it displaced, always across time. The problem is the jobs don't get created where they were taken away, and they don't go to the people who lost their jobs.
That's right. We often use that example in New Hampshire. The mill worker isn't going to be retrained to be a software engineer.
And that's where there's a role for the government, A, to have a really strong safety net, B, to make sure we do affirmative things to create investments in those communities, and C, to make sure there's skills training, right, to prepare people and give them the skills.
Oftentimes when people are dislocated, and I use the example of the mill worker here in New Hampshire, it's tough for them to get retrained.
I agree with you.
They're often in middle age, late middle age.
And that's why we have a strong safety net.
Sometimes people don't want to invest in these workers, even if they want to learn new skills. It's hard.
That's why we have a strong safety net, right?
So what does that mean, though? Does that mean that displaced worker stays home?
No, listen, there's lots of ways to deal with this issue. One way is to do something called double the earned income tax credit. The earned income tax credit, which is a tax credit you get if you work, is the most successful anti-poverty program in this country. If we were to double it, it would provide a lot more flexibility for people to engage in other jobs in their community that give them meaning and give them dignity, but don't maybe pay as much, right, as they need, right? So it's a direct workers' tax credit. So I just think some people, they're at a stage in their life where it's going to be very hard to retrain them. But that doesn't mean there's other things they can't do that have huge value in their community that they would get meaning out of. Oftentimes, those jobs don't have the same compensation as the job they lost, and that's why things like doubling the earned income tax credit can make that transition easier. I mean, there are real strategies to handle this stuff, right? Using tax policy, using educational policy, using incentives for people to invest in communities that are having jobs displaced. But what we don't have in this country right now is we don't have any strategy on any of this stuff. We're just letting the free market completely run its course. And that's why I've called for a national strategy around this issue, where the government, the private sector, and the nonprofit sector actually acknowledge that this is an issue.
When you say this, you mean workers dislocated
That's right.
from
Talk
economic
about,
trends.
Where we want to be in 10 or 15 years. And what are the affirmative policies we all do together, right? The government, the private sector, and the nonprofit sector to make this transition better for hardworking Americans.
I have to ask you,
because you can't stop change.
Especially those 50 million jobs that you say are going to be
you just
could be dislocated by
because it's never the right
intelligence.
answer to put the brakes on innovation. Right? For example, climate change. The only way we're going to solve climate change is through innovation, right? So the answer to all of our problems is innovation, but innovation comes with a cost as well. And that's why we have to actually really address it.
Okay, so speaking of cost,
Yes.
Congressman Delaney, you've talked about helping dislocated workers. You talked about bigger investments in our education system. You've talked about universal health care. You talked about a quote-unquote moonshot on climate change.
Innovation.
The debt and deficit, as you know, are already through the roof.
Absolutely.
The highest level of public debt for the U.S. government ever. Also, annual federal deficits are expected to average $1.2 trillion with a T. So how
I
do
have
you
a
pay
plan.
for all this?
So everything I've told you, I have a plan to pay for. See, unlike the other candidates running who just promise stuff and have no plan to pay for it, I feel it's my responsibility. I wrote a book after I announced I was running for president. It's called The Right Answer. It comes from a speech John F. Kennedy gave in 1958 where he said you shouldn't seek the Republican answer, you shouldn't seek the Democratic answer, you should seek the right answer. And in the book, I laid out, all the things I would do for all these issues. And the last chapter was my budget. Because I said, listen, if I'm going to promise the American people all this stuff, I'm going to show them how I'm going to pay for it. Just like so when I talked about healthcare, I had a plan to pay for it, all this stuff. So, I've got a plan to get our deficits down to 2%, which is where they need to be. Right? Because as long as our deficits are less than the rate of economic growth, we're going to be just fine as a country. And there's a way to do that. You want to hear it?
Briefly.
Well, it involves controlling healthcare costs because that's the biggest driver of spending, and it involves tax policy to get our revenues up to about 19% of our economy, and where they are right now is about 17.5%. And mostly there's a bunch of loopholes that have to be closed. The biggest loophole is the capital gains tax rate, right? We used to have to encourage people to invest, so we created this lower capital gains rate. Now every single person who has any resources invests. We have super liquid markets. People are investing all the time. The fact that people who invest for a living pay half in a tax rate compared to those who work for a living is incredibly unfair.
That's a popular loophole, though. Good luck getting that one closed.
Well, listen, but it's terribly unfair because, we have this tremendous concentration of wealth in this country, and then we're allowing them to pay half as much tax.
I have to ask you one last question, Congressman Delaney,
Sure.
and I do apologize for jumping in
No,
because
that's
I think
fine.
you had more to say about how
That's
you would
okay.
pay for these programs. But I have to ask you, as we discussed before, more than a dozen other Democratic candidates running, as you know. At this point, I think we're up to 15. How are you going to stand out, Congressman Delaney?
Well, I think my background is very different, right? I'm a blue-collar kid, first in family to go to college, was a successful entrepreneur, created thousands of jobs, youngest CEO on the New York Stock Exchange, and now I've rolled up my sleeves and served in the Congress of the United States. So I have kind of an unmatched set of expertise, which I think makes me very, very different. I also think my message, which is about solving problems and actually finding common ground and getting things done and bringing this terribly divided nation back together again, which I think is the central issue facing this country. I think that's not only exactly what our country needs at this moment in time, and I don't think anyone else is running on that, but I also think it's how we win. And I think by the fall of this year, all Democrats are going to be focused on is how do we beat Donald Trump.
Well, this is a time when many Democrats, are excited about the diversity in their party, the diversity among these candidates.
I am too.
I got an email from Sophie who says, as a white heterosexual male, what makes you more qualified than your more diverse/minority counterparts for president? What do you think about this question, Congressman Delaney? It's
So
coming up a
what
lot.
makes me more qualified has nothing to do with the fact that I'm a white heterosexual man, right? I think what's great about the Democratic field this time is that we represent America. I think what's great about the field is that me running as a white person has no advantage, which I would have had 30 or 40 years ago. But I do believe I'm the best leader. And I do believe the Democratic primary voters are going to nominate someone who they think is the best leader for our country. And that has nothing to do with the color of my skin or my gender or my sexual orientation.
Congressman Delaney, we could have talked a lot more.
We could have.
We will see you again.
Thank
you
you.
very much for being here. That's John Delaney. Again, he is a Democratic presidential candidate, a former 3-term congressman from Maryland. Our coverage continues all the time, even after the show is over, on NHPR.org and on Facebook. The Exchange is a production of New Hampshire Public Radio. The engineer is Dan Colgan. The senior producer is Ellen Grimm. Our producers are Ali Oshinsky, Jessica Hunt, and Christina Phillips. Our theme music was composed by Bob Lord, and I'm Laura Knoy.